The bullet extraction took 11 seconds. The armed raid on the trauma bay happened at second 12. Madison Reese had 3 chest tubes running, 2 units of O-negative pumping into a dying man's veins, and 0 interest in explaining to the tactical team why she wasn't stepping away from her patient. The lead operator had his rifle aimed at her sternum. She didn't blink. She adjusted the clamp on the subclavian line and told him flatly that if he wanted this patient, he'd have to shoot through her first. Nobody in St. Vincent's Hospital in Phoenix had ever heard her raise her voice. Tonight, 5 federal agents learned why that mattered. Before we go further, I need you to follow this story to the very end. Like this video, drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this has traveled. Now let's get into it. The fluorescent lights in Trauma 4 buzzed like insects trapped behind dirty plastic. Madison kept her head down, gloved hands steady, suturing a laceration on a construction worker who'd caught a rebar through his forearm. Clean entry, minimal nerve damage, textbook repair. She worked in silence while Dr. Brennan stood 3 feet away, shouting orders at a resident who'd mixed up the CT schedule. "You're a goddamn liability, Hayes. I don't care what your test scores were." Madison tied off the final stitch. The patient, a heavy-set man named Ruiz, watched her with tired eyes. "You good?" she asked quietly. "Better than I was." She gave him a brief nod and stripped off the gloves. Brennan turned toward her, still red-faced from tearing into Hayes. "Carter, you done playing seamstress over there?" Madison didn't correct him. Her last name wasn't Carter. It was Reese. He'd been calling her the wrong name for 4 months. She'd stopped pointing it out after the 2nd week. "Patient stable. Ready for discharge once pharmacy clears the script." Brennan waved her off. "Fine. Go restock the crash cart. It's a mess." She walked past him without a word. Hayes, the battered resident, caught her eye and muttered a quiet thanks as she passed. She didn't ask why. Maybe he appreciated the distraction. Maybe he just needed someone to look at him like he wasn't garbage. The ER had a rhythm. Chaos during trauma alerts, dead silence during the in-between hours. Madison moved through both like furniture. Present, functional, unnoticed. The other nurses joked around during downtime. She restocked shelves. They complained about shifts and families and the administration. She charted. Dr. Brennan talked over her during handoffs. She let him. It was easier that way. At 9:47 p.m., the double doors exploded inward. Not figuratively, literally. 2 EMTs crashed through, pushing a gurney at full speed, both screaming for a trauma team. The man on the stretcher wasn't moving. Blood soaked through the sheets, pooling beneath him, dripping onto the floor in a steady rhythm. Madison moved before anyone else did. "Bay 2, she called out, already snapping on gloves. The EMTs swerved the gurney into the bay. Madison caught the rail, her brain processing the injuries in fragments. Gunshot wounds. Multiple. Center mass. Right shoulder shredded. Left thigh severed something arterial. The man's skin had gone the color of old newspaper. "What have we got?" Dr. Kellerman appeared at her elbow, eyes sharp. GSW's chest and extremities. BP's tanking. Pulse is barely there. Madison's hands moved automatically, cutting away the blood-soaked clothing, exposing the wounds. 3 entry points. No visible exits. She pressed gauze against the chest wound. It turned red instantly. "Get him on the monitor. I need 2 large-bore IVs and 4 units of O-negative, now." The other nurses scrambled. Madison was already there, sliding the IV catheter into the antecubital vein, taping it down, hanging the first unit of blood. She didn't wait for orders. Kellerman didn't stop her. The man on the table wasn't entirely unconscious. His eyes cracked open, unfocused, glazed with pain and shock. Madison leaned closer. "You're in a hospital. We've got you. Stay with me." His lips moved. No sound came out. She couldn't tell if he was trying to speak or just drowning in his own blood. Kellerman barked orders at the team. Madison kept pressure on the chest wound, her forearm slick with blood, her scrubs already ruined. Then she saw the ink. A tattoo, partially obscured by blood and torn skin. Not a normal tattoo. Military, specific. A unit insignia she recognized from another lifetime. Her hand froze for half a second, long enough for her brain to catch up to what she was seeing. The man's eyes found hers. This time, they focused. "Help," he rasped. "I am helping." "They're coming." Madison opened her mouth to ask who, but the door slammed open again. This time, it wasn't EMTs. 6 men. Black tactical gear. No uniforms. No badges visible. Rifles held low but ready. They moved into the trauma bay like they owned it, boots squeaking on the blood-slicked tile. The lead man was tall, late 30s, clean-shaven, and his eyes swept the room with the kind of precision that came from training. Dr. Kellerman stepped forward, confused. "What the hell is this?" The lead man didn't look at him. "Federal operation. We're taking custody of this patient." "Custody?" Kellerman's voice climbed an octave. "He's actively dying. Not your concern." Madison didn't move. Her hand stayed on the wound, applying steady pressure. The man on the table wasn't stable. He wouldn't survive a transfer, not even across the hallway, let alone out of the hospital. She glanced at the monitor, systolic pressure dropping into the 70s, heart rate climbing past 140. "He can't be moved," she said. The lead operator turned toward her for the first time. His expression didn't change. "Step away from the patient." "No." The room went silent. Even Kellerman stopped mid-sentence. Madison felt the weight of every eye on her, but she didn't look up. She kept her focus on the wound, on the rise and fall of the man's chest, on the thin thread keeping him alive. "Excuse me?" the operator said. "He'll die if you move him. Severed artery, multiple GSWs. He's already in hypovolemic shock. You take him out of this room, you kill him." "That's not your decision." Madison finally looked up. Her voice stayed calm, flat. "It's his life. And right now, I'm the only one keeping it going." The operator's jaw tightened. One of the men behind him shifted his weight, rifle angling slightly upward. Madison saw it, didn't react. She turned back to the patient, her hands never leaving the wound. "Ma'am, I need you to step aside." "I need you to leave my trauma bay." Kellerman made a strangled noise. "Madison, maybe we should—" "He stays here," she said. "You want him? You wait until he's stable." The operator took a step forward. Madison didn't flinch. She adjusted the gauze, checked the IV line, kept working. The man on the table was still conscious, his eyes locked on her face now. She could see the recognition there. The question. The operator's hand moved toward her shoulder. Madison reacted. She didn't think about it, didn't plan it. Her body moved on muscle memory burned into her nervous system years ago in a place most people couldn't find on a map. She caught his wrist mid-reach, twisted it outward at an angle that hyperextended the elbow, and used his own momentum to lock him into a standing joint manipulation that would snap bone if he resisted. The room exploded into motion. Rifles came up. Nurses screamed. Dr. Kellerman threw his hands in the air. Madison held the operator in place, her grip firm, her face blank. "Don't touch me while I'm working," she said. The operator stared at her, not in anger, in shock. His eyes flicked down to her hands, to the way she'd controlled him without visible effort, to the stance she'd taken without thinking. Recognition dawned on his face like sunrise. "Stand down," he said. His team hesitated. Rifles stayed up. "I said stand down!" Slowly, the weapons lowered. Madison released his wrist and returned to the patient. Her hands were shaking now. She hid it by grabbing fresh gauze, applying pressure, forcing her breathing to steady. The operator rubbed his wrist, staring at her. "Who the hell are you?" Madison didn't answer. She couldn't, not without unraveling the last 6 years of careful silence. Dr. Kellerman found his voice. "She's a nurse. Now get the hell out of my ER before I call security." "Security won't help you." The operator's tone had shifted. He wasn't threatening. He was warning. He glanced at the patient on the table, then back at Madison. "We need him. Orders from the top." "He's not stable." "Then stabilize him. Fast." Madison looked at Kellerman. The doctor stared back, completely out of his depth. She made the call. "Get me a chest tube kit, 2 more units of blood, and prep the OR. Now." The nurses moved. Kellerman opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded and grabbed a phone to call upstairs. Madison worked in silence, hyper-focused, ignoring the armed men watching her every move. She got the chest tube in, drained the hemothorax, checked the lung reinflation. The man's breathing eased slightly. Systolic pressure ticked up to 85. "Better," she muttered. The patient's hand moved, weak, trembling. He reached toward her. She caught his hand without thinking. His grip was barely there. Ghost, he whispered. Madison's blood turned to ice. The operator heard it. She saw his expression change, confusion, then disbelief. What did he just say? The operator asked. Madison didn't answer. She squeezed the patient's hand once and let go. The man's eyes closed, his vitals stabilized. Not good, but better. The operator stepped closer. This time, he didn't reach for her. He studied her face, her posture, the way she moved around the gurney. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped. You're her. Madison kept working. They said you died overseas, helo crash, Syria, classified op, no survivors. Madison's hand stilled, just for a second. Then she resumed checking the IV lines. You've got me confused with someone else, she said quietly. No, I don't. The operator looked at his team, then back at her. We need to move him, tonight, but if you're telling me he won't make it, he won't. Then you come with us. Madison's head snapped up. Not a chance. You just disarmed a federal operator in front of witnesses. You've got combat medical training that no civilian nurse should have. And that man just called you a classified call sign that doesn't exist in any public record. So you're either coming with us willingly, or I'm making a phone call that ends with a lot more people in this room asking a lot worse questions. Madison stared at him. The weight of the old life pressed against her ribs like a physical thing. She thought about running. She thought about disappearing again. She thought about the man on the table who would die if she left. I need 2 hours, she said. You've got one. She didn't argue. She turned back to the patient and got to work. The armed men didn't leave. They stood along the walls, rifles slung, watching. Dr. Kellerman hovered near the door, useless and terrified. The other nurses stayed busy at a distance, pretending not to notice the small army camped in their ER. Madison worked faster than she'd ever worked in her life. Stabilized the chest wounds, repaired the arterial bleed in the thigh, pumped him full of blood and plasma and pressors, monitored every twitch of his vitals. The man didn't wake up again, but his heart kept beating. That was enough. At 11:03 p.m., she stepped back from the table. Blood covered her scrubs from neck to knee. Her hair had come loose from its tie. She looked at the operator. He's stable, for now. You move him, you do it carefully, and you keep a medic on him the entire time. The operator nodded. He gestured to his team. 2 of them moved forward with a transport stretcher. They transferred the patient with surprising care. Madison watched, her chest tight. You're coming, the operator said. It wasn't a question. Where? Somewhere you can answer questions, and somewhere he can get the care he needs. Madison glanced at Dr. Kellerman. The man looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last hour. Go, he said quietly. I'll cover your shift. She didn't thank him. She grabbed her jacket from the hook by the door and followed the armed men out of the trauma bay. Behind her, she heard the nurses whispering, heard Kellerman on the phone with administration, heard the familiar chaos of the ER closing in to fill the space she'd just left. The night air outside hit her like cold water. 3 black SUVs idled at the ambulance bay, engines running, windows tinted. The patient was loaded into the middle vehicle. Madison was directed to the rear seat of the lead SUV. She climbed in without protest. The operator sat beside her. The door closed. The convoy pulled out of the hospital lot and onto the empty streets of Phoenix. Madison watched the city lights blur past the window. She didn't ask where they were going. She already knew it didn't matter. What's your real name? The operator asked. Madison didn't look at him. You already know it. I want to hear you say it. She was quiet for a long time, then barely audible. Reese, Madison Reese. The operator nodded slowly. Captain Reese, combat trauma specialist, attached to JSOC. 3 tours. Decorated. Presumed KYA 6 years ago in a classified operation that officially never happened. That sounds about right. Why fake your death? Madison leaned her head against the window. The glass was cold. Because I was tired of bleeding for people who didn't care if I lived or died. The operator didn't respond to that. They drove in silence for another 10 minutes before turning into an industrial area on the outskirts of the city. The convoy stopped in front of a nondescript warehouse. No signs. No lights except a single bulb over a side door. Madison stepped out of the SUV. The air smelled like dust and gasoline. The operator led her inside. The warehouse had been converted into a makeshift medical facility. Surgical lights. monitors, equipment that didn't belong in a civilian hospital. The patient was already on a table, hooked up to machines, surrounded by people in tactical gear and medical scrubs. A woman in her 50s approached Madison. No uniform, no insignia, just cold eyes and a federal badge clipped to her belt. "Captain Reese, I'm Agent Hale. We need to talk." About? About why a dead woman just saved the life of a man who was supposed to disappear tonight. Madison's stomach dropped. She looked at the patient on the table, then back at Hale. "What do you mean disappear?" Hale's expression didn't change. "He's not supposed to survive. Orders came down 3 hours ago. Eliminate the target. No witnesses, no records, and then you show up and pull him back from the edge." Madison's pulse hammered in her ears. "You sent those men to kill him." "I sent those men to follow orders. Orders I didn't write." "Then who did?" Hale stepped closer. Her voice dropped. "That's what we're trying to figure out, because the man on that table isn't a criminal. He's one of ours. Special Activities Division. Deep cover. And someone very high up wants him dead before he can talk." Madison's mind raced. She looked at the patient again, at the tattoo on his shoulder, at the surgical scars she'd noticed while working on him, scars that told a story of a man who'd been through hell multiple times and kept going. "What did he see?" Madison asked. "That's the question." The operator who'd been in the ER appeared at Hale's side. He handed her a tablet. She glanced at the screen, then showed it to Madison. Surveillance footage. Grainy. Time-stamped 48 hours earlier. It showed the patient, alive, healthy, walking into a federal building in D.C. 2 men in suits flanking him. Then nothing. The feed cut out. "He went in for a debrief," Hale said. "Never came out. Next time we see him, he's dumped on a street corner in Phoenix with 3 bullets in him and a do not resuscitate order attached to his file." Madison stared at the screen. "Someone inside tried to kill him. Someone inside succeeded. Except you wouldn't let him die." Madison looked up sharply. "You're blaming me?" "I'm saying you just made yourself a target." Hale pocketed the tablet. "Whoever ordered the hit is going to know he survived, and they're going to know you're the reason. So congratulations, Captain. You just painted a bullseye on your back." Madison's jaw tightened. "I did my job. Your job was to stay dead." The words hit like a slap. Madison didn't flinch. She'd heard worse, survived worse. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Hale studied her for a long moment. Then she gestured toward the patient. "Keep him alive, find out what he knows, and help us figure out who's dirty before they bury all of us." Madison looked at the man on the table, at the machines breathing for him, at the fragile thread holding him to life. She thought about walking away, disappearing again, letting someone else deal with the mess. But she'd already crossed the line. The moment she'd refused to step aside in that trauma bay, she'd made her choice. "Fine," she said, "but I need full access. No restrictions, no interference." Hale nodded. "Done." Madison walked to the table and started assessing the patient's condition. Behind her, she heard Hale giving orders, coordinating with her team. The operator stood nearby, watching Madison work with an expression that was part respect, part unease. 2 hours later, the patient's vitals had stabilized. Madison sat in a folding chair beside the table, exhausted, her scrub still stiff with dried blood. The warehouse was quieter now. Most of the tactical team had left. Only Hale, the operator, and a handful of medical staff remained. The patient's eyes opened. Madison leaned forward. "Hey, you with me?" He blinked slowly. His gaze found her face and held. "Ghost." "Yeah, it's me." His voice was a rasp. "They tried to kill me." "I know. Not just me. The whole team." His hand moved weakly, gesturing. "Somalia. The op. It wasn't what they told us. We walked into an ambush. Our own people set us up." Madison's blood went cold. "What are you talking about?" "Money, cartels. Someone's running drugs through military channels. We found the evidence. They killed everyone who knew." His eyes closed. "I'm the only one left." Madison turned toward Hale. The agent was already on her phone, her expression grim. The operator swore under his breath. "How many people are we talking about?" Madison asked. The patient's hand gripped hers, weak but desperate. 12. 12 operators. All dead. They made it look like enemy fire. But I saw our own people pulling the triggers. The room was silent except for the beeping of the monitors. Madison felt the weight of it settling over her like concrete. This wasn't just a rogue hit. This was a massacre, a cover-up. Hale ended her call and walked over. We're moving him, now. Secure location, full protection. He's not stable enough. He's dead if he stays here. You said it yourself. Someone knows he survived. They'll come for him. And when they do, they won't care who gets in the way. Madison looked at the patient. He was drifting again, slipping back under. She checked his vitals one more time. Stable. Barely. But stable enough to survive a careful transport. All right, she said, but I'm coming with you. Hale didn't argue. They prepped the patient for transport in under 10 minutes. Madison climbed into the back of the ambulance with him, monitoring his vitals as they pulled out of the warehouse and onto the highway. The city lights faded behind them. Madison watched the empty road ahead and wondered how deep this went. How many people were involved? How many had to die to keep the secret buried? And she wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life by refusing to let one man die. The patient stirred beside her. His eyes opened again, clearer this time. Thank you, he whispered. Madison didn't respond. She adjusted the IV drip and kept her eyes on the monitor. Outside, the desert stretched into darkness. Somewhere behind them, people with power and guns were realizing their cleanup had failed. And Madison Reese, the woman who was supposed to be dead, had just become the only thing standing between a whistleblower and a bullet. The safe house was a ranch-style building 40 miles outside Phoenix, tucked between rock formations that looked like they'd been dropped from the sky. No neighbors, no streetlights, just sand and scrub brush, and a sky full of stars that Madison didn't have time to appreciate. They moved the patient inside on a portable gurney, wheels catching on the gravel driveway. Madison kept one hand on the IV pole, the other checking his pulse every 30 seconds. His skin was still too pale, his breathing too shallow, but he was alive. That counted for something. The interior of the house had been gutted and rebuilt into something functional. Medical equipment lined one wall. Communications gear filled another. Hale was already on 3 different phones, coordinating with people Madison couldn't see. The operator from the ER, his name was Briggs, she'd learned during the drive, stood by the window with his rifle, watching the darkness outside like it might bite back. Madison got the patient settled in what used to be a bedroom. The walls were bare except for monitoring equipment and a single window covered with blackout curtains. She rechecked his vitals, adjusted the meds, made sure the chest tube was draining properly. He didn't wake up. That was probably better. Hale appeared in the doorway. How long until he can talk? He just had 3 bullets pulled out of him and lost half his blood volume. He needs rest. We don't have time for rest. Madison turned to face her. You want answers or you want a corpse? Pick one. Hale's jaw tightened, but she didn't push. She glanced at the patient, then back at Madison. We've got 12 hours, maybe less. Whoever tried to kill him is going to realize he's still breathing. When they do, they'll send more than 6 men. Then you'd better get more people here. I don't know who I can trust. The words hung in the air. Madison understood the weight of them. If the corruption ran deep enough to order a hit on one of their own operators, it ran deep enough to have eyes everywhere. Hale couldn't call for backup without risking a second ambush. They were on their own. Madison stripped off her blood-stiffened gloves and tossed them in a medical waste bin. What's his name? Marcus Webb, 34. Special activities. 15 years in, most of it classified. Family? Ex-wife. No kids. Parents dead. Sister in Chicago, but she hasn't spoken to him in 5 years. Madison looked at the man on the bed. Marcus Webb. A ghost, just like her. Someone who'd given everything to the job and had nothing left when the job decided he was expendable. Why Somalia? Madison asked. Hale pulled a chair over and sat. She looked exhausted. 3 months ago, we got intel about a weapons shipment moving through the Horn of Africa. Standard interdiction op. Webb and his team went in to verify the target and set up surveillance. What did they find? Not weapons? Money. Millions of dollars being funneled through military transport channels. Webb traced it back to a shell company tied to cartel operations in Central America. Someone inside our infrastructure was using government resources to move drug money overseas. Madison's stomach turned. And they killed his entire team to cover it up. 12 operators. Made it look like an ambush by local militants. Clean, efficient. If Webb hadn't survived long enough to send a distress signal, we'd never have known. Who ordered the hit? That's what we need to find out. Hale rubbed her face. Webb sent encrypted files to a secure server before he went dark. We haven't been able to access them. He's the only one with the decryption key. Madison looked at the unconscious man. So he's not just a witness. He's evidence. He's the only evidence, Briggs called from the other room. We've got movement. Hale was on her feet instantly. Madison followed her into the main room where Briggs stood by the window, rifle up, eyes fixed on something outside. Madison couldn't see anything except darkness and the faint outline of the rocks beyond the property line. Where? Hale asked. East Ridge. 2, maybe 3 contacts. No lights. Hale swore. She grabbed her radio and keyed it. Perimeter team report. Static. Then a voice. Low and tense. We've got eyes on 3 vehicles approaching from the access road. No headlights. Moving slow. Madison's pulse kicked up. That was fast. Too fast. Hale turned to Briggs. How did they find us? Briggs didn't answer. He was too busy scanning the darkness. Madison's mind raced. They'd taken precautions. Switched vehicles twice. Used a route that avoided traffic cameras. Unless someone had been tracking them from the start. We've got a leak, Madison said. Hale's expression went cold. Not possible. Only 4 people knew about this location. Then one of them talked. Or one of them is dirty. The words hit like a punch. Madison looked at Briggs. He was still focused on the window, but she saw the tension in his shoulders. Saw the way his grip tightened on the rifle. Hale noticed too. Briggs, she said quietly, put the weapon down. He didn't move. Briggs. Slowly he turned to face them. His expression was unreadable. I didn't tell them. Then how did they find us? I don't know. Hale's hand moved toward her sidearm. Madison stepped to the side, putting space between herself and both of them. The room felt smaller suddenly, tighter. Someone's tracking us, Briggs said. Could be a vehicle, could be equipment, could be one of us. Hale's eyes narrowed. Strip, now. What? You heard me. If there's a tracker, we need to find it. Briggs hesitated, then set his rifle down and started pulling off his gear. Tactical vest, belt, boots. Hale searched each piece methodically. Madison did the same with her own clothes, checking seams and pockets. Nothing. The radio crackled. Vehicles are stopping, half a click out. Looks like they're setting up. Hale grabbed the radio. How many? At least a dozen, heavily armed. They're not here to talk. Madison's chest tightened. A dozen armed men against 3 people and an unconscious patient. The math didn't work. She looked toward the bedroom where Webb lay, still sedated, still helpless. We need to move him, Madison said. Where? Hale snapped. We're surrounded. Then we fight. Briggs grabbed his rifle and checked the magazine. We can hold them for maybe 10 minutes. After that, we're out of ammunition and options. Hale paced the room thinking. Madison watched her, saw the calculations happening behind her eyes, saw the moment she made a decision. We don't fight, Hale said. We buy time. For what? Reinforcements. I'm making a call. You said you didn't know who to trust. I don't, but I know one person who'll come regardless. Hale pulled out a satellite phone and dialed. The call connected after 2 rings. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. It's Hale. I need an emergency extraction. Send everything you've got. A pause. Then, where? Hale gave the coordinates. We've got a high-value target and hostiles inbound. ETA? 30 minutes. We might not have 30 minutes. Then hold the line. The call ended. Hale pocketed the phone and looked at Briggs. You're on overwatch. Slow them down, but don't engage unless you have to. Make every shot count. Briggs nodded and moved to a window facing east. Madison grabbed medical supplies and headed back to the bedroom. If they were about to get hit, she needed Webb stable enough to move on short notice. She was halfway through checking his IV when she heard the first shot. Not close. Maybe 200 yards out. A single crack that echoed off the rocks. Then silence. Madison's hands didn't shake. She finished checking the line, verified the chest tube, made sure the monitors were reading correctly. Webb's vitals were holding, barely. More gunfire. Closer now. Briggs returned fire from the window, controlled bursts, 3 rounds at a time. Madison heard Hale on the radio coordinating with the perimeter team. heard the stress in her voice. They're pushing from two sides. We can't hold them. Madison looked at Webb. He was starting to stir, eyelids fluttering. She leaned close. Marcus, can you hear me? His eyes opened, unfocused at first, then sharpening. Where? Safe house, but not for long. We're about to have company. He tried to sit up. Madison stopped him. Don't. You'll rip the stitches. How many? Too many. He processed that. Then his hand moved to his chest, feeling for something. My gear, where is it? What gear? Tactical vest, left pocket. There's a drive. Madison's heart jumped. The encrypted files? He nodded weakly. Everything. Names, transactions, proof. Madison ran back to the main room. Where's his gear? Hale pointed to a pile near the door. Madison tore through it, found the vest, checked the pockets. Left side. A small USB drive, black, unmarked. She held it up. This? Hale stared at it. That's the evidence? That's everything. An explosion rocked the house. The windows shattered inward, spraying glass across the floor. Madison hit the ground, covering her head. When she looked up, smoke was pouring through the broken windows. Briggs was down, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. They're breaching, Hale shouted. Madison crawled to Briggs. The wound was bad, but not fatal. She pressed gauze against it. Hold pressure. He nodded, teeth gritted. Madison grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. She could see figures moving through the darkness now. Black tactical gear, professional. They moved like military, which meant they probably were. She squeezed off 3 rounds. One of the figures dropped. The others scattered, finding cover behind rocks and vehicles. Return fire shredded the wall above her head. Madison ducked, rolled to the side, came up firing again. Hale was at the other window doing the same. Where the hell is our backup? En route. That's not good enough. Madison reloaded. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory from a lifetime ago. She'd sworn she was done with this, done fighting, done killing, but apparently the choice wasn't hers anymore. A shadow moved past the window. Madison spun, fired. The figure went down hard. She didn't check if he was dead. Didn't have time. They're flanking, Briggs yelled. Madison turned. 2 men were coming through the back door, rifles raised. She fired twice. Both dropped. Behind them, more shadows. She was out of ammunition. She dropped the rifle and pulled a knife from Briggs' belt. It wasn't much. It would have to be enough. The next man through the door saw her too late. She was inside his guard before he could swing the rifle around, blade driving up under his ribs, angled toward the heart. He made a wet, choking sound and collapsed. She took his rifle and kept moving. Hale was shouting something, but Madison couldn't hear over the ringing in her ears. She cleared the hallway, checked the bedroom. Webb was awake now, trying to pull himself off the bed. His face was gray with pain and effort. Stay down, Madison ordered. I can fight. You can die. Your choice. He fell back against the mattress, breathing hard. Madison moved to the doorway and fired blind into the main room. Someone screamed. She didn't look to see who. Then she heard it. A low thumping sound that grew louder by the second. Helicopter rotors. Multiple birds. The cavalry had arrived. Hale's voice cut through the chaos. Friendlies inbound! Hold your fire! The gunfire outside stopped. Madison risked a look through the shattered window. The attackers were retreating, falling back to their vehicles. In the distance, she could see the silhouettes of Blackhawks against the night sky, spotlights cutting through the darkness. The helicopters didn't land. They hovered, door gunners opening up on the retreating vehicles. Tracers lit up the desert. Explosions bloomed orange and white. Within seconds, the attackers were either dead or running for their lives. Madison lowered her rifle. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline crashing. She looked at Briggs. He was still conscious, still applying pressure to his shoulder. Hale was on the radio again, coordinating the cleanup. The first helicopter touched down 50 yards from the house. Armed soldiers poured out, spreading into a defensive perimeter. An officer approached the house, face grim. Agent Hale. That's me. Colonel Vance, we're here to extract. Hale nodded toward the bedroom. Patient first. He's critical. Vance gestured to a medic team. They moved past Madison without a word, heading for Webb. Madison followed, watching as they transferred him to a stretcher. He grabbed her wrist as they lifted him. The drive. he rasped. Don't lose it. Madison patted her pocket where she'd stashed the USB. I've got it. He held her gaze for a moment longer, then let go. The medics carried him out. Madison watched through the broken window as they loaded him into the helicopter. The rotor spun up and it lifted off, banking east toward Phoenix. Hale appeared beside her. We need to go. Now. Where? Somewhere we can figure out who just tried to kill us. Madison looked at the bodies scattered around the property, at the burning vehicles in the distance, at the blood on her hands and clothes. She thought about the drive in her pocket, about the names and evidence that had cost 12 lives and counting. I want out, she said quietly. Hale looked at her. You were out. You walked back in. I saved a man's life. You stopped an execution. That's different. Madison didn't respond. Hale was right, and they both knew it. The moment Madison had refused to step aside in that trauma bay, she'd chosen a side. There was no walking away now. They flew to a military installation outside Tucson, landing on a secure airfield surrounded by fences and armed guards. Madison was escorted to a debriefing room and told to wait. She sat in a metal chair and stared at the wall for 20 minutes before the door opened. A man walked in. Late 50s, graying hair, expensive suit. He carried himself like someone used to being obeyed without question. He sat across from Madison and folded his hands on the table. Captain Reese, I've read your file. Then you know I'm dead. On paper. In reality, you've been working as a civilian nurse in Phoenix for the last 6 years. Quiet, unremarkable. Until tonight. Madison didn't respond. The man leaned forward. My name is Director Harmon. I run the division Marcus Webb worked for, and I need your help. I already helped. I kept him alive. You did more than that. You recovered evidence that could bring down one of the largest corruption networks in the intelligence community. But that evidence is useless if we can't decrypt it. Webb has the key. Webb is in surgery. Again. It'll be hours before he's conscious, and we don't have hours. Whoever ordered the hit knows we have the drive. They're going to move fast to bury it. Madison pulled the USB drive from her pocket and set it on the table. Then get your tech people to crack it. We've tried. Military-grade encryption. Without the key, it's a paperweight. Madison stared at the drive. So what do you want from me? Webb trusts you. When he wakes up, he'll talk to you. I need you to get that decryption key and help us unlock those files before the people responsible disappear. Why would I do that? Harmon's expression hardened. Because 12 operators died to protect this evidence. Because more people will die if we don't stop the corruption. And because you're already on the kill list, Captain. They know who you are now. They know you saved Webb. You don't help us. You spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. Madison felt the trap closing around her. She'd known this was coming. Had known it the moment she saw that tattoo on Webb's shoulder. The moment she'd disarmed Briggs in front of witnesses. She'd painted a target on herself, and there was no scrubbing it off. When can I see him? She asked. As soon as he's out of surgery. Harmon stood and walked to the door. He paused, hand on the handle. For what it's worth, Captain, I'm glad you're not dead. We need people like you. People like me are the reason I faked my death in the first place. He didn't argue. The door closed behind him. Madison sat alone in the room, staring at the USB drive on the table. Such a small thing, barely weighed anything. But it had already cost 12 lives and nearly cost Webb his. She wondered how many more it would take before this was over. Hours passed. Madison was given a fresh set of clothes and a place to clean up. The shower water ran red for a full minute before it cleared. She stood under the spray longer than necessary, letting the heat seep into her muscles. When she finally stepped out, she barely recognized the person staring back from the mirror. Webb came out of surgery just after dawn. Madison was waiting outside the recovery room when the surgeon emerged, pulling off his gloves. He'll live, the surgeon said. But it was close. Another hour, and we'd have lost him. Madison nodded. Can I see him? He's sedated. Won't be conscious for a while. I'll wait. She sat in a chair outside the recovery room and watched the sun come up through a narrow window. The sky turned pink, then orange, then blue. Nurses moved past her. Doctors checked charts. Nobody questioned why she was there. At 8:47 a.m., a nurse emerged from the recovery room. He's awake, asking for you. Madison stood and walked inside. Webb looked worse than he had in the safe house, pale, hollowed out, but his eyes were clear. "You're still here," he said. "Where else would I go?" He tried to smile. Didn't quite manage it. "They told me what happened, the attack, the extraction. You saved my ass twice now. Third time's the charm." He laughed, then winced. "Don't make me laugh. Hurts like hell." Madison pulled a chair close to the bed. "They need the decryption key, Marcus. The files you sent. We can't access them without it." His expression changed. Guarded now. "Why should I give it to you?" "Because 12 of your people died for this. Because more will die if the corruption isn't stopped. Because you didn't survive 3 bullets just to let the bastards responsible walk away." Webb stared at the ceiling, silent for a long time. Then, "The key isn't something I memorized. It's biometric, fingerprint and retinal scan, both required." Madison's stomach sank. "They'll need you physically present to decrypt it." "Yeah. You're in no condition. I don't care about my condition. I care about finishing what my team started." Madison studied him, saw the determination, the rage barely contained beneath the pain. Webb wasn't going to let this go, even if it killed him. "All right," she said. "I'll tell them." She stood to leave. Webb caught her hand. "Ghost," he said. "Why'd you really fake your death?" Madison looked at their joined hands, at the scars on his knuckles that matched the ones on hers. "Because I was tired of being a weapon." "You think you stopped?" She pulled her hand free. "I tried." "Yeah, me too." Madison left the recovery room and found Harmon waiting in the hallway. He read her expression and nodded. "He'll do it," Harmon said. It wasn't a question. "He wants to be there when you decrypt the files. Wants to see the names. He's barely conscious. He doesn't care." Harmon considered that. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Prep the secure analysis room. We're bringing Webb down in 20 minutes. They moved Webb to a windowless room in the basement. Banks of computers lined the walls. Technicians sat at workstations, fingers flying across keyboards. Webb was wheeled in, still attached to monitors and IV lines. Madison stayed close, watching his vitals. A technician handed Webb a biometric scanner. "Fingerprint first." Webb pressed his thumb against the sensor. It beeped. Green light. "Now retinal." Webb leaned forward. The scanner hummed. Another beep. The computer screen came to life, cascading code scrolling past faster than Madison could read. Then it stopped. Files appeared. Dozens of them. Harmon leaned over the technician's shoulder. "Open the primary file." The tech clicked. A document filled the screen. Transaction records. Bank accounts. Names. Madison felt her blood turn cold as she read. Deputy directors. Senior officials. People with enough power to bury entire operations. And at the top of the list, a name that made Harmon's face go white. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. Webb looked at the screen, then at Harmon. "You see now? You see what we were up against?" Harmon didn't answer. He pulled out his phone and made another call. "I need you to arrest someone. Now." Madison watched the names scroll past, saw the evidence of corruption that reached into the highest levels of the intelligence community, saw the proof that Webb's team had been murdered by their own people to keep this buried, and she saw her name at the bottom of a separate list, a kill order, dated 3 hours ago. "They're coming for me," she said quietly. Harmon ended his call and looked at her. "They're coming for all of us." The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing the room in red. Alarms blared. Harmon grabbed his radio. "Status report." Static, then a voice, panicked. "Breach on level 2, multiple hostiles. They're inside the building." Madison's heart hammered. She looked at Webb, still weak, still helpless. Looked at Harmon, reaching for his sidearm. Looked at the technicians scrambling for the exits. "How many?" Harmon shouted into the radio. The response was drowned out by gunfire. The gunfire was close enough that Madison felt it in her chest. She grabbed the wheelchair and spun Webb toward the far wall, where the technicians had already disappeared through a service door. Harmon was shouting into his radio, but the responses were fractured, overlapping, useless. "South stairwell is compromised. Need backup on 3. They're everywhere." Madison didn't wait for orders. She pushed Webb through the service door into a narrow corridor lit by emergency strips along the baseboards. The wheelchair caught on something and nearly tipped. Webb grabbed the armrests, his face twisted in pain. "I can walk," he said through gritted teeth. "You can bleed out. Sit." Harmon caught up to them, weapon drawn, breathing hard. Behind them, the gunfire intensified, closer. Madison could hear boots on concrete, voices shouting commands in clipped professional tones. Military, or former military, people who knew exactly what they were doing. "Where's the nearest exit?" Madison asked. "Loading dock, 2 floors up. That's where they'll expect us to go." "You have a better idea?" Madison looked at Webb. His monitors were still beeping, IV bags swinging from the pole attached to his wheelchair. He couldn't run, could barely sit upright. Moving him anywhere was a risk. Staying here was suicide. "Maintenance tunnels," Webb said. His voice was weak but steady. "This facility has a network underneath, used for utilities. Connects to the old bunker system from the Cold War." Harmon stared at him. "How do you know that?" "I did my homework before I went rogue. Figured I might need an exit strategy." Madison didn't ask why he hadn't used it earlier. They were past the point of questions. She pushed the wheelchair down the corridor toward a junction where pipes ran along the ceiling. Webb pointed to a locked door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." "There." Harmon tried the handle. Locked. He shot the mechanism twice. The door swung open, revealing a metal staircase descending into darkness. The air that drifted up smelled like rust and stagnant water. "Can't get the chair down there," Madison said. Webb was already unhooking himself from the monitors. "Then I walk." "You'll rip every stitch. Better than getting shot." He pushed himself out of the wheelchair. His legs buckled immediately. Madison caught him, taking his weight. He was heavier than he looked, all compact muscle and bone. Harmon grabbed his other side, and together they started down the stairs. Each step was agony. Madison could feel Webb trembling, could hear the hitch in his breathing. Blood was seeping through his hospital gown. The stitches weren't holding, but they kept moving because stopping meant dying. The staircase ended in a tunnel barely tall enough to stand in. Exposed pipes ran overhead. Water dripped from somewhere, echoing. The emergency lights down here were older, yellower, casting shadows that moved wrong. "Which way?" Harmon asked. Webb pointed left. "Should connect to the old bunker network. From there we can reach the surface a quarter mile from the main building." "Should? I've never actually used it." Harmon swore. They started walking. Madison kept one arm around Webb's waist, feeling him lean heavier with each step. His breathing was getting worse, shallow, fast, signs of shock setting in. "Stay with me," she said. "Not planning on dying in a sewer." "This isn't a sewer." "Smells like one." Behind them, the sound of the breach echoed down through the stairwell. Voices. Boots. Flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. Madison didn't look back. She focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on keeping Webb upright, on not thinking about how many armed men were following them into the tunnels. The corridor split. Webb hesitated, trying to orient himself. Right. They went right. The tunnel narrowed. Madison had to duck to avoid a low-hanging pipe. Harmon's radio crackled with static and fragments of transmission. None of it was good news. Overrun. Casualties. Fall back. Harmon shut off the radio. The silence was worse than the noise. They could hear the pursuit now. Not close, but not far enough. Steady, methodical. Hunting. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber. Old Cold War construction, concrete walls reinforced with steel beams. Equipment from another era rusted in corners. Madison saw what looked like a decontamination station, a blast door sealed with a wheel lock, supply crates stenciled with dates from the 1960s. There. Webb pointed to another tunnel entrance on the far side. That should take us to the emergency exit. They crossed the chamber. Madison's boots splashed through standing water. The sound echoed too loud. Webb's legs gave out halfway across. He went down hard, taking Madison with him. She broke his fall but couldn't stop him from hitting the concrete. He made a sound like all the air had been punched out of him. When Madison rolled him over, fresh blood was spreading across his gown. A stitch had torn, maybe more than one. "We need to stop the bleeding," she said. "No time." "You're hemorrhaging." "Madison." He grabbed her wrist. His grip was weak. "Keep moving. Get the evidence out. That's all that matters." "You matter." "Not as much as 12 dead operators and the people who killed them." Harmon crouched beside them. Can he walk? Madison checked the wound. Bad. Not immediately fatal, but they were losing time they didn't have. Not far. Then we carry him. They got Webb back on his feet. This time Harmon took most of his weight. Madison led the way into the next tunnel, one hand on the wall for balance. The passage sloped upward. That was good. Meant they were heading toward the surface. Flashlight beams swept through the chamber behind them. Voices called out, coordinating. Madison heard the distinctive sound of rifle bolts being checked. Professional, disciplined. These weren't hired thugs, these were operators. The tunnel ended at a ladder leading straight up. Madison looked at Webb. He looked at the ladder. Neither of them said what they were both thinking. I'll go first, Madison said. Harmon, you push from below. She climbed fast, hands slipping on the rust-covered rungs. 20 feet up, 30. Her shoulders burned. At the top, a hatch sealed with another wheel lock. She braced herself and turned it. The mechanism screeched. She pushed. The hatch didn't move. It's stuck, she called down. Hit it. Madison slammed her shoulder into the hatch. Pain shot down her arm. The hatch shifted an inch. She hit it again. Again. On the fourth impact, it gave way, swinging open. Desert air rushed in, cool and dry and tasting like freedom. Madison pulled herself through and looked around. They were in a drainage culvert half a mile from the main facility. The sun was high now, the sky painfully blue. In the distance, smoke rose from the installation. She could hear sirens. Clear, she called down. Getting Webb up the ladder was brutal. He tried to climb on his own, but made it 3 rungs before his strength gave out. Harmon had to push him physically, rung by rung, while Madison pulled from above. By the time they got him through the hatch, Webb was unconscious. Madison checked his pulse. Thready. Fast. His skin was cold and clammy. She ripped open his gown and saw the extent of the damage. The wound had torn open completely. Blood pulsed out with each heartbeat. He's bleeding out, she said. Harmon was on his phone. I need an immediate extraction. Coordinates. He rattled off numbers. Patient is critical. We need a trauma team standing by. Madison applied direct pressure to the wound. Her hands were soaked instantly. How long? 10 minutes. He doesn't have 10 minutes. She looked around frantically. Nothing. Just desert and rock and a culvert that stretched in both directions. No medical supplies. No way to stop the bleeding. She was watching a man die, and there was nothing she could do about it. Then she remembered. The IV line, still attached to Webb's arm. She grabbed it, followed it to the bag hanging from his belt. Saline. Not ideal, but better than nothing. She spiked the bag wide open, flooding his system with volume. It wouldn't replace the blood he was losing, but it might buy him minutes. Stay with me, Marcus, she said. Don't you dare die now. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, drifting. The files, we got them, they're safe. Names, we know the names. We've got everything. He tried to say something else, but the words wouldn't come. His eyes rolled back. Madison felt his pulse weaken under her fingers. No, 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 no. Harmon knelt beside her. Madison, he's not dying, not after everything. She started chest compressions, counted them out. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Her training took over, mechanical and precise. Webb's ribs flexed under her palms. She felt one crack, kept going. Come on, Marcus. Breathe. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. 30 compressions. 2 breaths says. The sound of helicopter rotors cut through the air. Madison kept working, didn't look up, didn't stop. The helicopter touched down 50 yards away, rotor wash kicking up dust. Medics ran toward them with a stretcher and equipment. Gunshot wound to the chest, Madison said as they reached her. Reopened during transport. He's been down for 2 minutes. The medics took over. They had him intubated and on the stretcher in under 30 seconds. Madison stepped back, her hands shaking, her scrubs drenched in blood that wasn't hers. She watched them load Webb into the helicopter, watched it lift off and bank toward Phoenix. Harmon put a hand on her shoulder. You did everything you could. Madison didn't answer. She stared at her hands, at the blood drying in the creases of her palms, at the proof that sometimes everything wasn't enough. A second helicopter landed. Different. Military markings. Soldiers poured out, securing the area. An officer approached Harmon and saluted. Director Harmon, we've retaken the facility. Hostiles are neutralized or in custody. How many? Harmon asked. 16 hostiles, 8 casualties on our side. Madison felt the number like a weight. 8 more people dead, 8 families destroyed, all because of names on a list and money in offshore accounts. The files? Harmon asked her. Madison pulled the USB drive from her pocket. Still there, still intact. She handed it to him. Everything Webb died for. He's not dead yet. He will be. Harmon looked at the drive, then at Madison. We need to move fast. The people on this list will know we have their names. They'll run or they'll fight. Either way, we've got a narrow window. What do you need from me? I need you to testify. What you saw, what Webb told you. It'll help build the case. Madison thought about that. Thought about sitting in front of lawyers and officials and cameras. Thought about her face plastered across news channels. Thought about the life she'd built in Phoenix, quiet and invisible, burning to ash. And if I say no? Harmon's expression hardened. Then 12 operators died for nothing, and the people who killed them walk free. Madison looked at the smoke rising from the facility, at the soldiers securing the perimeter, at the helicopter shrinking to a dot in the distance, carrying Marcus Webb toward an operating room where surgeons would try once again to save his life. She thought about the doctor at St. Vincent's who talked over her, the nurses who didn't know her name, the patients who looked through her like she was furniture. She'd spent 6 years trying to disappear, trying to be small and unnoticed and safe. I'll testify, she said. Harmon nodded. We leave in 5 minutes. They flew back to Phoenix in the military helicopter. Madison sat in silence, watching the desert pass below. When they landed, 2 black SUVs were waiting. Harmon directed her to the first one. Where are we going? She asked. Federal building downtown. We're filing charges within the hour. The drive took 20 minutes. Madison spent it staring out the window at the city she'd called home for 6 years. It looked different now, smaller, less like safety, and more like a cage she'd built for herself. The federal building was chaos. Agents rushing through hallways, phones ringing, people shouting. Harmon led Madison through security to an elevator that required a key card. They descended to a sub-basement level. The doors opened onto a secure operations center. Screens covered every wall. Satellite imagery. Live feeds. Data streams. Analysts sat at workstations coordinating what looked like a dozen simultaneous operations. A large screen at the front showed a list of names with photos attached. Madison recognized some of them. Senior officials, people she'd seen on the news. Are they in custody? She asked. 6 of them are. The rest are being picked up as we speak. Harmon pointed to one photo. Deputy Director Charles Brennan. This one tried to run. TSA stopped him at the airport 2 hours ago. Madison stared at the photo. How deep does this go? Deep enough that we're not sure who else is involved. That's why we need your testimony. We need someone who can put Webb's team in Somalia, connect them to the evidence, and explain why they were killed. A door opened and a woman in a business suit walked in, late 40s, sharp eyes, carrying a briefcase. Director Harmon, we're ready to proceed. Harmon turned to Madison. This is Assistant U.S. Attorney Catherine Voss. She'll be handling the prosecution. Voss shook Madison's hand. Her grip was firm, professional. Captain Reese, I've been briefed on your involvement. We need to move quickly. The defense teams are already mobilizing. What do you need? Madison asked. Everything, start to finish. Don't leave anything out. They moved to a conference room. Madison sat across from Voss and 2 other attorneys while a court reporter sat up in the corner. For the next 3 hours, Madison walked them through every detail. The patient arriving at St. Vincent's, the armed team trying to take custody, the safe house attack, the evidence, the breach at the military facility. Voss took notes, asked questions, pushed for specifics, times, names, descriptions. By the time they finished, Madison's throat was raw and her head pounded. That's enough for now, Voss said. She closed her notebook and looked at Madison. You understand that once we file these charges, you'll be a target. These people have resources, connections. They won't go quietly. I understand. We can offer protection, safe house, security detail. Madison thought about that. Thought about spending the next months or years looking over her shoulder, living in fear, waiting for the next attempt. No, she said. I'm done hiding. Voss frowned. That's not advisable. I don't care. I spent 6 years being invisible. I'm not doing it anymore. Harmon leaned forward. Madison, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. These people killed 12 operators. They tried to kill Webb. They tried to kill me. I'm not giving them the satisfaction of watching me run. The room went quiet. Voss exchanged a look with Harmon. Neither of them argued further. All right, Voss said finally, but if anything happens, I'll handle it. Madison stood to leave. Harmon walked her to the door. For what it's worth, I think you're making a mistake. Wouldn't be my first. She took the elevator back to ground level and walked out of the federal building into late afternoon sunlight. The air was hot and dry. Traffic rushed past. People walked by, oblivious, living their normal lives. Madison stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of the last 36 hours settle into her bones. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then curiosity won out. Hello? Captain Reese? A man's voice, calm, professional, unfamiliar. We need to talk. Who is this? Someone who'd prefer you stop talking to the FBI. Madison's blood went cold. How did you get this number? The same way I got your address, your work schedule, and the names of everyone you've spoken to in the last 6 years. You're not as invisible as you think. She looked around. The street was crowded. Too many faces. Too many places to hide. What do you want? I want you to reconsider your testimony. Lose the files. Forget what Webb told you. Walk away. And if I don't, then people you care about start dying. Starting with the night shift nurse at St. Vincent's. Sarah Chen, isn't it? Sweet girl. 2 kids. Would be a shame if something happened to her. Madison's hand tightened on the phone. You touch her and what? You'll come after me? You're one person, Captain. We're everywhere. In the bureau. In the courts. In the police department. You can't win this. Maybe not, but I can make it cost you. The voice on the other end laughed. Brave words. Let's see if you still believe them tomorrow. The call ended. Madison stood frozen, phone still pressed to her ear. Around her, the city continued its normal rhythm. Cars, people, life. As if the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. She pulled up her contacts and dialed. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. St. Vincent's ER, this is Sarah. Madison closed her eyes. Sarah, it's Madison. I need you to listen carefully and don't ask questions. Leave work right now. Take your kids and go somewhere safe. Don't go home. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Just go. Silence on the other end, then. Madison, what's happening? Please, just trust me. Okay? Okay. I'm leaving. Madison ended the call and immediately dialed Harmon. He answered on the first ring. They just called me, Madison said. They threatened one of the nurses from St. Vincent's. They know everything. Harmon swore. Where are you? Downtown, outside the federal building. Stay there. I'm sending a car. I'm not going into protective custody. Madison, but I need you to protect Sarah Chen, night shift nurse at St. Vincent's. They mentioned her specifically. I'll send a team to her house right now. She's not there. I told her to run. Smart. Give me her number. We'll track her down and get her somewhere safe. Madison rattled off Sarah's number and hung up. She started walking. Didn't have a destination. Just needed to move. Her mind raced through options. She could run, disappear again, change her name, her face, her life. Start over somewhere new. But that would mean Webb died for nothing. Would mean 12 operators stayed buried and forgotten. Would mean the corruption won. She thought about the quiet nurse at St. Vincent's. The woman everyone overlooked. The person who'd spent 6 years trying to be invisible. That woman was dead. Madison Reese was done being a ghost. Her phone rang again. Different number. She answered. Madison. It was Webb. His voice was weak but alive. They said you testified. You're awake. Barely. Listen. They're coming for you, the people we exposed. They won't stop until you're dead or silent. I know. They already called. Webb was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm sorry. I dragged you into this. I walked in myself. Don't apologize for that. Still, You saved my life twice. That means something. Madison stopped walking. She was standing in front of St. Vincent's, the building where this had all started, where she'd worked for 6 years, where she'd been invisible and safe and slowly dying inside. What happens now? Webb asked. Madison looked up at the ER entrance, at the ambulance bay where armed men had come for a patient and found something else entirely. Now, she said, now we finish what you started. She hung up and walked through the doors into the ER. The evening shift was just starting. Nurses at the station looked up as she approached. One of them was Jessica, a younger nurse Madison had trained. Her eyes went wide. Madison, I thought you were... Jessica's gaze dropped to Madison's clothes, blood-stained, torn. Oh my God, are you okay? I need to speak to Dr. Kellerman. Where is he? Trauma 2. But Madison walked past her without explaining. She pushed through the double doors into the trauma bay. Kellerman was standing over a patient, stitching a laceration. He looked up when she entered. Carter? He still had her name wrong. What are you doing here? It's Reese, Madison Reese, and I need to talk to you. Kellerman's expression shifted. Confusion, then recognition. You're the one from the news, the military nurse. They're saying I'm testifying against half the intelligence community. They're right. The room went quiet. The patient on the table, a teenage boy with a split chin, stared at her. Kellerman set down his instruments. Why are you here? He asked quietly. Because I need you to know that people might come looking for me, armed, dangerous. If they do, you evacuate this ER. You don't negotiate. You don't try to be a hero. You get everyone out and you call the police. Kellerman stared at her. Jesus Christ. Do you understand? Yes. Madison nodded. She turned to leave, then stopped. And doctor, my last name is Reese, not Carter. I've worked here for 6 years. You might want to learn it. She walked out before he could respond. The nurses at the station watched her leave. Jessica called after her, but Madison didn't stop. She pushed through the main doors and back out into the evening air. Her phone rang again. Harmon. Sarah Chen is safe, he said. We've got her and her kids in a secure location. Good. Madison, I'm serious about protection. These people don't make idle threats. Neither do I. She hung up and kept walking. Her apartment was 3 blocks away. Small, quiet. The place she'd been invisible for 6 years. She climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor and unlocked the door. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it. Clean, sparse, impersonal. She'd never decorated, never put up photos or bought nice furniture. Because some part of her had always known this was temporary, that eventually her past would catch up. Madison walked to the bedroom and opened the closet, pushed aside the civilian clothes, reached to the back where a lockbox sat hidden under old blankets. She opened it. Inside was everything she'd kept from her old life. Military ID, dog tags, a folded flag from a funeral she hadn't attended, and at the bottom, wrapped in cloth, a Sig Sauer P226, military issue, unregistered, loaded. She picked up the weapon, felt its weight, felt the muscle memory returning as her hand found the grip. 6 years since she'd held a gun. It felt like yesterday. Madison checked the chamber. Loaded. She slid a fresh magazine in and chambered around. Then she tucked the weapon into her waistband and walked back to the living room. She sat on the couch and waited. They came at midnight. Madison heard them before she saw them. The sound of footsteps in the hallway. Too deliberate to be residents. Too careful. She stood and moved to the side of the door, weapon drawn. The lock clicked. They weren't bothering with subtlety. The door swung open and 2 men entered. Black tactical gear, suppressed weapons. They scanned the room, saw the empty couch, began to turn toward where Madison stood. She fired twice. Both men dropped. Madison moved into the hallway. Empty. She cleared each corner, moving fast, clearing lines of sight the way she'd been trained a lifetime ago. At the end of the hall, the stairwell door was propped open. She approached carefully. Heard voices below. Multiple contacts. She couldn't take them all in a direct fight. Madison retreated into her apartment and grabbed her phone. Dialed 911. What's your emergency? Shots fired at 2847 Maple Street, apartment 3C. Multiple armed intruders. Officer needs assistance. She hung up before the operator could ask questions. Then she moved back to the hallway and positioned herself behind cover. The men were coming up the stairs now. She could hear their boots, their breathing, their whispered coordination. The first one appeared at the landing. Madison waited until he was committed to the hallway, then fired. He went down. The others scattered back down the stairs. "She's armed!" someone shouted. "No shit!" Madison reloaded. Sirens wailed in the distance. The attackers heard them too. She heard arguing below, then footsteps running. They were retreating. Madison didn't pursue. She held her position until the police arrived 5 minutes later. When the first officers came up the stairs, weapons drawn, she set her gun on the ground and raised her hands. "I'm Madison Reese," she said calmly. "I'm the one who called. The intruders are gone, but there are 2 bodies in my apartment." The officers moved past her cautiously. One of them called for backup. Another started securing the scene. A detective arrived 20 minutes later and took her statement. By dawn, the apartment building was a crime scene. News vans lined the street. Reporters called out questions as Madison was escorted out by federal agents. She didn't answer them, just climbed into Harmon's SUV and let him drive her away. "You killed 2 men," Harmon said. "They broke into my home. They were private contractors, former military, connected to one of the people on Webb's list. Then I guess they died for the wrong person." Harmon glanced at her. "You're not going home again, not for a long time." Madison looked out the window, at the city waking up around her, at the life she'd built crumbling behind her with every mile. "I know," she said quietly. They drove to a different safe house, larger, more secure. Madison spent the next week there, preparing for trial, giving depositions, talking to lawyers. The news cycle exploded with stories about the corruption scandal. Arrests were made, officials resigned. The 12 dead operators were named publicly, their families finally given answers. Through it all, Madison waited. For the next attack, for the next threat, for the moment when everything would fall apart. It came on a Tuesday. Harmon walked into the safe house with an expression that made Madison's stomach drop. "Webb died an hour ago," he said. "Complications from surgery. They couldn't stop the bleeding." Madison felt the floor drop out from under her. "No. I'm sorry." She sat down slowly, felt the weight of it crushing her chest. Marcus Webb. The man she'd saved twice. The man who'd trusted her with the truth. Dead. "The trial," she started, "goes forward. We have his testimony from before. We have the evidence. But we lost our star witness." Madison stared at her hands, at the scars that matched Webb's, at the proof that surviving wasn't the same as living. "I want to see his body," she said. "Madison, I want to see him." Harmon drove her to the morgue. They took her to a viewing room where Webb lay on a steel table covered by a sheet. Madison pulled it back and looked at his face. Peaceful now. The pain finally gone. She thought about this first moment she'd seen him, bleeding on a gurney, dying. She'd saved him then. But in the end, it hadn't been enough. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Behind her, Harmon's phone rang. He answered it, stepped away. Madison heard his tone change, heard the sharp intake of breath. "Madison," he said, "we have a problem." She turned. "What?" "One of the defendants just made bail, posted by an anonymous benefactor. He walked out of federal custody 20 minutes ago." Madison's blood turned to ice. "Which one?" Harmon showed her his phone. The photo on the screen made her stomach drop. It was the senior official from Webb's list, the one at the top of the chain, the one with the most to lose. "He knows where this safe house is," Harmon said. "We need to move you, now." But Madison wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking past him at the window, at the reflection of a red laser dot that had just appeared on Harmon's chest. "Get down!" she shouted. The window exploded inward. Madison hit Harmon with her full weight, driving him sideways as the window shattered. Glass rained down. The bullet meant for his chest punched through the wall where he'd been standing, spraying plaster dust. They hit the floor hard. Madison rolled, pulling Harmon behind the steel autopsy table. More rounds punched through the window. Methodical. 3-round bursts. Professional shooting. "How many?" Harmon gasped. Madison risked a glance. The angle was wrong to see the shooter's position, but the trajectory told her enough. "At least one. Elevated. Probably the building across the street." Harmon was already on his radio. "Shots fired at the county morgue. Sniper, northeast position. All units respond. The shooting stopped. Madison heard sirens approaching. The sniper wouldn't stick around. Too much exposure. They'd already failed the primary objective, and professionals knew when to retreat. Madison stood slowly, keeping the autopsy table between herself and the window. Webb's body lay undisturbed on the table, the sheet still pulled back. She looked at his face one more time, then covered him again. "They knew we'd come here," she said. "How?" "Same way they knew about the safe house. Same way they knew about Sarah. They're tracking us." Harmon checked himself for injuries, found none. "We swept for devices, you, me, the vehicles. Nothing. Then they're tracking something else." Madison's mind raced through possibilities. Phones, credit cards, surveillance. Then it hit her. The evidence. The USB drive. Where is it? Secure facility downtown. Why? What if it's transmitting? What if they put a tracker in the drive itself before Webb got his hands on it? Harmon's face went pale. That would mean they've known where it was the entire time, and they've been tracking everyone who touched it. Harmon pulled out his phone and made a call, spoke rapidly in clipped sentences. Hung up. "They're checking it now." Police arrived 3 minutes later, secured the building, found the sniper's nest across the street in an abandoned office. Shell casings, rifle, no shooter. Madison gave her statement to detectives who looked at her like she was either insane or radioactive. Maybe both. Harmon's phone rang. He answered, listened, went completely still. "You're sure?" A pause. "Destroy it. Now." He ended the call and looked at Madison. "You were right. Microtransmitter embedded in the USB casing, active for the last 4 days. They've been watching us the whole time. Not just watching, they know every person we've talked to, every location we've been, every move we've made." Madison felt the weight of it settle over her. Sarah, the nurses at St. Vincent's, the lawyers, Webb, everyone she'd been in contact with was now exposed. The enemy hadn't been chasing them. They'd been cataloging targets. "We need to warn everyone," she said, "already on it." But Madison, Harmon's expression was grim. "They're not done. Whoever posted bail isn't running. They're cleaning house, and we just became priority targets." They left the morgue under armed escort. 3 SUVs, 6 agents, a route that changed twice to throw off surveillance. Madison sat in the back seat and stared at her phone. Thought about calling Sarah. Thought about warning her that the danger wasn't over. But Harmon's people had already moved her to federal protection. Calling would only create another vector for tracking, another vulnerability. The convoy pulled into an underground parking structure beneath the federal building. They took an elevator that required 2 key cards and a biometric scan, descended to a sublevel Madison hadn't seen before. The doors opened onto what looked like a command center during wartime. Every screen showed live feeds. Surveillance footage, traffic cameras, satellite imagery. Analysts worked frantically, coordinating what appeared to be simultaneous operations across multiple cities. At the center of it all stood Assistant U.S. Attorney Catherine Voss, orchestrating everything with the precision of a conductor. She spotted Madison and Harmon, walked over. "We've arrested 4 more defendants in the last 2 hours," Voss said without preamble. "All connected to the corruption network, all trying to flee the country. TSA, FBI, and U.S. Marshals have been incredibly cooperative once they understood the scope." "Who posted bail?" Madison asked. Voss pulled up a file on a nearby tablet, showed Madison a photo. The man was in his early 60s, silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of face you'd see testifying before Congress. His name was printed below, Deputy Secretary Arthur Brennan. Madison's blood went cold. "Brennan? Same last name as Dr. Brennan at St. Vincent's," Voss finished. "His nephew. We're looking into the connection now." Madison thought about the doctor who'd spent months calling her the wrong name, who'd dismissed her, talked over her, treated her like she was invisible. And the whole time, his uncle was running a corruption network that killed 12 operators. "Where is he?" Madison asked. "Arthur Brennan? Unknown. He posted bail and disappeared. We've got teams searching, but he's ghost." "What about the nephew?" "Dr. Brennan is at St. Vincent's, on shift right now. We've had eyes on him since this morning. He hasn't done anything suspicious." Madison's instincts screamed, "Pull him in, now!" Voss frowned. On what grounds? He hasn't committed a crime. His uncle is a fugitive who just tried to kill a federal agent. The nephew works at the hospital where this entire thing started. You think that's coincidence? Voss considered that. Then she turned to one of the analysts. Get me a warrant for Dr. Michael Brennan, material witness, and send a team to St. Vincent's to bring him in. The analyst moved fast. Madison watched the screen, saw feeds switching to show the hospital, exterior cameras, parking lot, ER entrance. The tactical team was already mobilizing. Harmon stood beside her. You think the nephew's involved? I think he's been watching me for 6 months and nobody questioned why. I think he knew exactly who I was the whole time. That's a reach. Is it? They tracked Webb to Phoenix, knew he'd go to a hospital, knew I'd be working that night. This whole thing was set up. Harmon's expression shifted. If you're right, then this was never about stopping Webb from talking. It was about drawing me out, making me visible, using me as bait. The realization hit them both at the same time. Madison grabbed the nearest phone and dialed St. Vincent's. The line rang 4 times before someone picked up. St. Vincent's Emergency Department. This is Madison Reese. I need to speak to Dr. Brennan immediately. He's with a patient. Get him. Now. A pause. Then, hold please. Madison waited, watched the screens showing the tactical team pulling into the hospital parking lot, watched them move toward the entrance in formation. Watched. The feed cut out. Every camera showing St. Vincent's went dark simultaneously. What just happened? Voss demanded. An analyst's fingers flew across her keyboard. We lost all feeds. Hospital security system is offline. Get them back. Trying. It's not responding. Someone killed it from the inside. The phone in Madison's hand went dead. She looked at Harmon. He knew we were coming. The tactical team's already inside. Then we need to get there. Now. They took the fastest route. Lights and sirens. Madison sat in the passenger seat, gripping the door handle as they wove through traffic. Her mind raced through scenarios. Brennan had cut the cameras. That meant he was either running or preparing for something worse. The hospital came into view. No signs of disturbance from the outside, no fire alarms, no evacuation. Whatever was happening, it was contained to specific areas. They pulled up to the ER entrance. The tactical team leader met them in the ambulance bay. Status? Harmon asked. Building is secure. We found Dr. Brennan in Trauma 2. He's refusing to come out. Refusing? Says he's treating a critical patient. Won't leave until he's done. Madison pushed past them and headed inside. The ER was chaos. Nurses running, patients on gurneys, alarms beeping. She made her way to Trauma 2 and found the tactical team positioned outside the closed bay doors. Through the window, she could see Brennan. He stood over a patient on the table, working calmly, methodically. The patient's face was obscured by surgical drapes, but Madison could see the monitors. Vitals were stable. This wasn't an emergency. She pushed through the doors. The tactical team shouted at her to stop, but she was already inside. Brennan looked up. His expression didn't change. Nurse Reese, I was wondering when you'd arrive. Step away from the patient. I'm performing a procedure. It would be unethical to stop now. Madison moved closer. Close enough to see past the surgical drapes. Close enough to see that the patient on the table wasn't a patient at all. It was a mannequin. What is this? Madison asked. Brennan set down his instruments. A demonstration. You spent 6 months here and nobody saw you. Nobody knew who you were. You thought you were invisible, but I saw you from day one. Your uncle told you. My uncle understands the value of surveillance. When Marcus Webb's team started investigating the Somalia operation, we knew someone would eventually come forward. We monitored every hospital in the Southwest, watched for anyone with military medical training working under an assumed identity. You were bait. We both were. Brennan pulled off his gloves. The moment Webb showed up here, I notified my uncle. We let you save him, let you become involved, because we needed to know who else had copies of the evidence, who else was part of the investigation. Madison's hand moved toward her weapon. The tactical team burst through the doors behind her, rifles raised. Hands up, they shouted. Brennan raised his hand slowly. You have no grounds to arrest me. I've committed no crime. Conspiracy. Voss's voice came from the doorway. She walked in holding a tablet. Obstruction of justice. Accessory after the fact. We've got your phone records, doctor. Every call you made to your uncle in the last 6 months. Every text message. Every email. You weren't just watching Madison Reese. You were feeding information directly to a fugitive involved in multiple homicides. Brennan's calm facade cracked. Those calls were personal. Were they? Let me read you one. 2 weeks ago. The target is still in place, routine established. Vulnerable during night shifts. Want to explain who the target was? Brennan said nothing. Here's another. 3 days ago, after Webb arrived at your ER. Package delivered. Ghost has surfaced, proceeding as planned. That was you telling your uncle that Madison had saved Webb's life. The color drained from Brennan's face. Voss continued. And my personal favorite, yesterday. She's testifying, extraction points compromised, recommend immediate termination. You gave your uncle the locations of our safe houses. You told him when to strike. You're responsible for every attack on federal personnel in the last 72 hours. I want a lawyer, Brennan said. You'll get one. Right after we charge you with conspiracy to commit murder. The tactical team moved in. They cuffed Brennan and let him out. He didn't resist, didn't look at Madison as they passed, just stared straight ahead like a man watching his life collapse in real time. Madison stood in the empty trauma bay and felt the weight of it. 6 months. She'd worked beside Brennan for 6 months and never suspected, never saw the surveillance, never realized she'd been the subject of an operation the entire time. Harmon appeared beside her. You okay? They used me. They tried to, but you stopped them. Webb's dead. 12 operators are dead. How is that stopping them? Because we have the evidence now, we know the names, and we're about to burn the whole network down. They returned to the federal building. The operations center was even more chaotic than before. More arrests, more warrants. The corruption scandal was spreading faster than anyone could contain. News networks had picked up the story. Congressional hearings were being scheduled. Careers were ending by the hour. Voss found Madison in a conference room going over testimony notes. We've located Arthur Brennan. Madison looked up. Where? Private airfield outside Phoenix. He was trying to board a flight to Mexico. U.S. Marshals have him in custody. I want to see him. Voss hesitated. That's not protocol. I don't care about protocol. He tried to have me killed, multiple times. I want to look him in the eye. Voss glanced at Harmon. He nodded. Make it happen. They transported Brennan to a federal holding facility, put him in an interrogation room with cameras recording everything. Madison walked in alone. Brennan sat at the metal table, his expensive suit wrinkled now, his silver hair mussed. He looked smaller than his photo, less intimidating. Madison sat across from him, said nothing, just waited. Brennan spoke first. You should have died with the rest of them in Syria. Sorry to disappoint. 6 years, you stayed hidden for 6 years. Why come back now? I didn't come back. You forced me out. Brennan leaned forward. We didn't force anything. You chose to save Marcus Webb. You chose to testify. You chose to make yourself visible. And you chose to kill 12 operators to hide your corruption. That wasn't murder. That was damage control. Madison felt rage building in her chest, but kept her voice level. You call it what you want. The courts will call it conspiracy to commit murder, multiple counts. You're looking at life without parole. I'll make a deal. I always make deals. Not this time. We have everything, the financial records, the communications, the testimony. We don't need you to flip. We just need you to shut up and spend the rest of your life in a cell. Brennan's confident facade finally cracked. You have no idea what you've done. The system we built kept things running smoothly, kept operations funded, kept people alive. By killing your own operators? They knew the risks. We all do. Madison stood. You're right. We do know the risks. And now you're going to learn what happens when those risks catch up to you. She walked out, didn't look back. Behind her, she heard Brennan shouting something about lawyers and deals and immunity. She didn't care. The man was finished. Over the next week, the corruption network collapsed completely. 23 arrests across 6 states. Officials at every level of the intelligence community caught in the web. The news cycle couldn't get enough of it. The biggest scandal in decades. Comparisons to Watergate. Madison watched it unfold from a different safe house. This one was quieter, more secure. No windows. Armed guards at every entrance. She spent her days preparing for trial and her nights trying to sleep without seeing Webb's face. Voss visited regularly with updates. The prosecution was building an airtight case. Multiple defendants were trying to flip for reduced sentences. The conspiracy was even wider than they'd initially thought. "We found something else," Voss said during one visit. She set a folder on the table. Financial records from Arthur Brennan's accounts. Payments to a medical facility in Syria, dated 6 years ago. Madison opened the folder, read the documents, felt her blood turn to ice. "They paid for your medical evacuation," Voss said quietly. "After the helicopter crash, Brennan's people pulled you out, got you to a hospital, saved your life." "Why?" "Insurance. They knew you were skilled, knew you might be useful someday, so they let you disappear into civilian life and kept track of where you went." Madison stared at the documents. The helicopter crash that supposedly killed her. The injuries that nearly did. The mysterious rescue that she'd never understood. It had all been Brennan's operation. "They've been watching me since Syria," she said. "Looks that way." Madison closed the folder. "Does anyone else know?" "Just us." "I thought you deserved to hear it privately." "Thank you." Voss stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Captain, you've shown remarkable courage through all of this. A lot of people would have run." "I tried running. Didn't work out." "No, I suppose it didn't." After Voss left, Madison sat alone with the folder. Thought about 6 years of thinking she'd escaped. 6 years of believing she was free. And the whole time she'd been exactly where they wanted her. But they'd made a mistake. They'd assumed she'd stay compliant, stay invisible, stay quiet. They'd forgotten she was a soldier. The trial began 3 weeks later. Federal courthouse in downtown Phoenix. Security was massive. Metal detectors, armed marshals, bomb-sniffing dogs. The media circus outside was overwhelming. Reporters shouting questions. Cameras everywhere. Protesters both supporting and condemning the defendants. Madison arrived in an armored SUV with a security detail. They escorted her through a side entrance to avoid the crowds. Inside, the courthouse was somber. Marble floors, high ceilings, the weight of justice hanging over everything. She was called to testify on the second day. Walked into the courtroom and felt every eye turn toward her. The jury. The gallery. The defendants sitting at the defense table in their expensive suits, looking like respectable citizens instead of conspirators. Arthur Brennan sat in the middle. He didn't look at her. Madison was sworn in, took the stand. Voss approached. "Please state your name for the record." "Madison Reese." "And your occupation?" "Registered nurse, formerly captain, United States Army Medical Corps." Voss walked her through everything. The night Webb arrived at St. Vincent's, the armed team trying to take custody. The safe house attack. The evidence. The conversation with Arthur Brennan in the interrogation room. Madison answered every question clearly, calmly. She didn't embellish, didn't exaggerate, just stated facts and let them speak for themselves. The defense attorneys tried to shake her during cross-examination, suggested she was unreliable, suggested her military background made her biased, suggested she had personal motivations for testifying. Madison didn't take the bait. She answered every question the same way, with facts, with evidence, with the calm demeanor of someone who'd been through worse than hostile lawyers. When she stepped down, she looked directly at Arthur Brennan. This time, he looked back, and she saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Fear. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Madison testified 3 more times, each appearance more damaging to the defense than the last. Other witnesses corroborated her testimony. The evidence piled up. Financial records, recorded communications, forensic analysis. The prosecution presented Webb's encrypted files in their entirety. Every transaction, every name, every piece of proof that 12 operators had been murdered to hide corruption at the highest levels. The defense tried to paint it as a rogue operation, a few bad actors, not a systemic conspiracy. The jury didn't buy it. Guilty verdicts across the board. Arthur Brennan, life without parole. His nephew Michael, 20 years. The other officials, sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years. No deals, no reduced sentences. Justice delivered with brutal efficiency. Madison watched the verdicts from the gallery, felt something loosen in her chest. Not satisfaction, not closure, just the simple knowledge that the 12 operators who died in Somalia hadn't died in vain. After the verdict, Voss found her outside the courthouse. "We did it." "You did it. I just told the truth. That's all we ever needed." Madison looked at the crowd dispersing on the courthouse steps, saw families of the dead operators crying, saw reporters rushing to file their stories, saw protesters celebrating or shouting in outrage depending on their perspective. "What happens now?" she asked. "Congressional hearings, internal investigations, reforms to prevent this from happening again." Voss paused. "And you get your life back." Madison thought about that. Her apartment had been destroyed in the attack. St. Vincent's had put her on indefinite leave after she'd testified. Her face was on every news channel in the country. She couldn't go anywhere without being recognized. "I don't think that life exists anymore," Madison said. "Then make a new one." Madison considered that as she walked away from the courthouse, past the cameras, past the reporters, into a waiting SUV that would take her to yet another safe house, while federal protection was lifted and she figured out what came next. She thought about Marcus Webb, about the 12 operators, about the price they'd paid for trying to do the right thing. And she thought about the quiet nurse at St. Vincent's who'd spent 6 years trying to be invisible. That woman was gone. But maybe that was okay. Maybe being invisible had never been safety. Maybe it had just been another kind of prison. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then curiosity won out. "Hello? Captain Reese?" A woman's voice, crisp, official. "This is Colonel Danvers, Army Medical Corps. I know you've been through quite an ordeal, but I wanted to reach out personally." Madison's chest tightened. "Why?" "Because the Army would like to offer you reinstatement, full rank restored, back pay for the last 6 years, and a position training the next generation of combat medics." Madison stared out the SUV window at the city passing by. "I thought I was dead." "Officially you were, but given recent events and your exemplary testimony, the Department of Defense has decided to correct that particular record. And if I say no, then we thank you for your service and wish you well in civilian life. But Captain, we need people like you, people who know how to stand up when everyone else is falling down." Madison closed her eyes, thought about Webb's words in the warehouse. "You think you stopped being a weapon?" Maybe she hadn't. Maybe she never would. But maybe being a weapon wasn't the worst thing if you were aiming at the right targets. "I need time to think," Madison said. "Take all the time you need. You've earned it." The call ended. Madison sat in silence for the rest of the drive. When they reached the safe house, Harmon was waiting. "I heard about the Army's offer," he said. "News travels fast. They called me first, asked if you were fit for service." "What did you tell them?" Harmon looked at her for a long moment. "I told them you're the most fit person I've ever worked with, and that if they let you slip away again, they're idiots." Madison smiled despite herself. "High praise. You've earned it." She walked past him into the safe house. It was temporary. Everything was temporary now, but for the first time in 6 years, that didn't feel like a problem. It felt like possibility. Her phone rang again. Different number. She answered. "Madison?" Sarah's voice, shaking, crying. "I just saw the news. Everything that happened. Everything you did. I can't believe—" "Sarah, are you okay?" "I'm fine. We're all fine. You saved us. All of us." Madison felt tears burning behind her eyes. "I just did what needed to be done." "No. You did what nobody else would do. You stood up when everyone else ran. That's not just duty. That's courage." They talked for a few more minutes. Sarah told her about protective custody, about her kids asking when they could go home, about how grateful she was that Madison had warned her in time. When the call ended, Madison sat on the couch and let herself cry. For Webb. For the 12 operators. For the 6 years she'd lost trying to be invisible. For the life she'd had and the life she was going to build. The tears didn't last long. She'd never been good at crying, but they were necessary. A release of pressure that had been building for years. When she was done, she wiped her face and stood, walked to the window and looked out at the city. Phoenix. The place where everything had fallen apart and come together simultaneously. She thought about Voss's words. Make a new one. Maybe she would. Maybe this time she'd build something that didn't require hiding, something that let her be both the soldier and the nurse, both the weapon and the healer. Her phone buzzed one more time. Text message. Unknown number. Tomorrow. 8 a.m. Federal Building, room 4022. Come alone. No signature, no explanation. Madison stared at the message and felt the familiar prickle of danger climbing her spine. She should ignore it. Should tell Harmon. Should let federal protection handle whatever this was. But she'd spent 6 years being careful, being safe, being invisible. She was done with that. Madison texted back, I'll be there. Madison arrived at the federal building 40 minutes early. Didn't trust the message, didn't trust the timing, didn't trust anything anymore. She went through security with a borrowed ID that Harmon had arranged, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and found room 4022 at the end of a quiet corridor. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open slowly, one hand near her weapon. The room was small, conference table, 4 chairs, no windows. And sitting at the far end of the table was a woman in her late 50s wearing a general's uniform. Captain Rees, thank you for coming. The woman stood and extended her hand. General Patricia Navarro, I apologize for the cryptic message, but this conversation needed to happen off the record. Madison didn't shake her hand. Why? Navarro lowered her hand without offense. Because what I'm about to tell you doesn't officially exist. Please, sit. Madison remained standing. I'm done with classified operations and off-the-record conversations. They almost got me killed. I understand, but this is different. This is about the 12 operators who died in Somalia, and why Marcus Webb's evidence was only part of the story. That got Madison's attention. She pulled out a chair and sat. I'm listening. Navarro opened a folder and slid it across the table. Webb's files documented financial corruption, money laundering through military channels, cartel payments, all true. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the operation in Somalia wasn't just about money. Madison opened the folder. Inside were documents stamped with classifications she'd never seen before. Photos of weapons, technical specifications, intelligence reports. What am I looking at? She asked. Proof that Arthur Brennan and his network weren't just moving drug money. They were facilitating illegal arms sales to foreign entities, using military transport, using classified routes. And when Webb's team stumbled onto the evidence, they had to be eliminated. Madison's stomach turned. How many weapons? Enough to destabilize 3 countries. Enough to arm insurgent groups for a decade. Enough to get every person involved hanged for treason. Why wasn't this in Webb's files? Because Webb died before he could decrypt the second drive, the one he hid before he was shot. Navarro pulled out another folder. We found it yesterday. In a storage locker in Tucson, registered under a false name. It contained everything, the arms deals, the buyers, the shipping manifests. Madison looked through the new documents, felt rage building with each page. This goes beyond corruption. This is treason. Yes. Navarro's expression was stone. And it involves more people than we arrested. People still in positions of power. People who will do anything to keep this buried. Then why tell me? Because you're the only person outside of military intelligence who knows the full scope of what happened. You saved Webb. You testified. You helped bring down Brennan's network. But there are others. And they're still operating. Madison closed the folder. What do you want? I want you to come back, not as a nurse, as a military investigator. You have combat medical training. You have operational experience. And you've proven you can't be bought or intimidated. We need people like you to root out the rest of this network. I spent 6 years trying to get away from this life. I know, but the life found you anyway. The question is whether you're going to keep running or whether you're going to finish what Webb started. Madison stared at the folders on the table, thought about the 12 operators, thought about Webb dying in surgery, thought about Sarah and her kids hiding in protective custody, thought about the nurse she'd been and the soldier she'd never stopped being. If I do this, Madison said slowly, I do it my way. No more secrets. No more off-the-record operations. Everything documented. Everything accountable. Navarro considered that. That's going to make things harder. Good. Hard means honest, and I'm done with the alternative." "Then welcome back, Captain." Navarro stood and extended her hand again. This time, Madison shook it. They spent the next hour going through the details, the scope of the investigation, the resources available, the targets still outstanding. When they finished, Madison left the federal building feeling both lighter and heavier simultaneously. She called Harmon from the car. "I'm taking the Army's offer. I figured you might." "When do you start?" 2 weeks. I've got some things to handle first." "Like what?" Madison looked out the window at the city. "Like saying goodbye to the person I was trying to be." She drove to St. Vincent's, parked in the employee lot where she'd parked for 6 years, walked through the ER entrance where she'd walked 1,000 times before. But this time, people noticed. Nurses stopped what they were doing, stared, whispered. A few approached cautiously like she might bite. "Madison?" Jessica, the young nurse she'd trained, looked at her with wide eyes. "We thought you weren't coming back." "I'm not permanently. I just needed to tie up some loose ends." "Everyone's been talking about what happened, about the trial, about you." Madison could imagine. "What are they saying?" Jessica hesitated. "That you're a hero, that you saved people, that you stood up to corruption and won." Madison didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired and scarred and older than her years. But she nodded. "Is Dr. Kellerman here?" "He's in his office. I know where it is." Madison walked through the ER toward the administrative wing. Staff members stopped to watch her pass. Some nodded. Some looked away. She didn't blame them. She'd become something uncomfortable, a reminder that the world was darker and more dangerous than hospital walls suggested. Kellerman's office was at the end of the hall, door open. He sat at his desk reviewing charts. Madison knocked on the doorframe. He looked up. Whatever he'd been about to say died in his throat. "Reese, you got my name right. Progress." Kellerman set down his pen. "I heard about the trial, about your testimony, about everything. Did you hear about your colleague, Dr. Brennan, how he spent months feeding information to his uncle while working 3 feet away from me?" Kellerman's face went pale. "I had no idea. Nobody did. That was the point." Madison stepped into the office. "I came to tell you I'm resigning, effective immediately." "You don't have to do that. We could work something out. I'm not resigning because I have to. I'm resigning because I'm done pretending to be something I'm not." Madison pulled an envelope from her jacket, her official resignation letter. She set it on his desk. 6 years I worked here. 6 years you called me Carter, talked over me in rounds, treated me like I was invisible. You want to know why?" Kellerman said nothing. "Because I let you. I thought being invisible meant being safe. Turns out it just meant being easy to overlook." Madison turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, you're a decent doctor, but you're a terrible leader. Try seeing the people around you. You might be surprised what they're capable of." She walked out before he could respond, stopped by the nurse's station to collect her personal belongings from her locker. Jessica helped her pack the few items she'd kept. Photos, books, a coffee mug with a faded hospital logo. "Are you really leaving?" Jessica asked. "I am." "Where will you go?" "Back to the Army, back to the work I should have been doing all along." Jessica was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "How did you do it? Stand up to all those people, testify, fight back. Everyone here is talking about how brave you were, but you always seemed so quiet." Madison closed her locker for the last time. Being quiet isn't the same as being weak. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is wait for the right moment. Then hit so hard nobody sees it coming. Jessica smiled. "I'll remember that." Madison left St. Vincent's for the last time. Didn't look back. Drove through Phoenix to the cemetery where Marcus Webb had been buried 3 weeks earlier. Military funeral, full honors. More people than she'd expected considering how classified his work had been. His grave was in a section reserved for veterans. Simple headstone. Name, rank, dates. Nothing about how he'd died or why. Madison stood there for a long time, not praying, just remembering. "I finished it," she said quietly. "The trial, the testimony, they're all going to prison. Your team didn't die for nothing." The wind picked up, carrying dust across the cemetery. Madison watched it settle on the graves, thought about how much death she'd seen, how much loss, how many people who'd fought for something bigger than themselves and paid with their lives. I'm going back, she continued, back to the military, back to the work. Navarro offered me a position hunting down the rest of the network. I'm taking it. A crow landed on a nearby headstone, watched her with black eyes. I know what you'd say, that I'm making myself a target again, that I should stay invisible, stay safe. Madison looked at Webb's name carved into stone. But you were wrong about something. I didn't stop being a weapon when I left the Army. I just pointed myself at the wrong targets, tried to save individual lives instead of fighting the system that was killing them. The crow flew away. Madison stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked back to her car. Over the next 2 weeks, she closed out her civilian life, terminated her apartment lease, sold most of her belongings, said goodbye to the few people who'd known her as Madison, the nurse instead of Captain Reese, the soldier. Sarah invited her to dinner. Madison almost declined, then realized she owed the woman more than that. She drove to the small house where Sarah had been relocated with her kids. Federal protection had been lifted, but the marshals still checked in daily. Sarah answered the door and pulled Madison into a hug before she could say anything. Thank you. Thank you for saving us. Thank you for warning me. Thank you for everything. Madison hugged her back awkwardly. Physical affection still didn't come naturally. You don't have to thank me. Yes, I do. You risked your life multiple times. Sarah's kids appeared behind her, a boy and a girl, 7 and 9. They stared at Madison with the wide-eyed curiosity children had for anything unusual. Are you the soldier lady? The girl asked. I am. Did you really fight bad guys? Madison crouched to eye level. I did, and I'm going back to fight more of them, but only because good people like your mom need someone looking out for them. The girl considered that. Will you win? I'm going to try really hard. That's all anyone can do, Sarah said quietly. They had dinner. Simple. Normal. The kind of evening Madison hadn't experienced in years. Sarah's kids asked questions about the military and combat, and whether Madison had ever met a tank. Sarah talked about rebuilding their lives, finding a new normal. When dinner ended, Madison stood to leave. Sarah walked her to the door. What happens now? Sarah asked. For you? I go back to work. Different uniform, same job. Saving people. Trying to. Sarah smiled. You're good at it. Better than anyone I've worked with. Don't forget that when things get hard. Madison nodded. They hugged again. This time it felt less awkward, more real. Driving away, Madison thought about Sarah's words, about being good at saving people, about the nurse she'd been and the soldier she was becoming again. Maybe they weren't so different. Maybe it had always been the same job, just different battlefields. 2 days before she was scheduled to report for duty, Madison received a call from Voss. Can you come to the federal building? There's something you need to see. Madison drove downtown, found Voss in the same conference room where she'd first given her testimony. But this time, the room was filled with people, families of the 12 operators who'd died in Somalia. Faces marked by grief and anger and something else Madison couldn't quite name. What is this? Madison asked quietly. They wanted to meet you, Voss said. They wanted to thank the person who made sure their family members didn't die in vain. One by one, the families approached her, shook her hand, told her about their sons and daughters and husbands and wives who'd been killed, about the lies they'd been told, about the relief of finally knowing the truth. A woman in her 60s, mother of one of the operators, grabbed Madison's hands and held them tight. They told us it was enemy fire, that there was nothing anyone could do, but you proved that was a lie. You proved someone was responsible. Thank you for giving us that. Madison didn't know what to say, didn't have words for this kind of gratitude. She just nodded and let the woman hold her hands until she was ready to let go. When the last family left, Madison stood alone in the empty conference room. Voss appeared in the doorway. You handled that well, Voss said. I didn't do anything. You let them thank you. For some people, that's everything. Madison looked at the empty chairs where grieving families had sat. Does it ever get easier? Knowing people died because of decisions other people made? No, but it gets necessary. Because if we don't hold the decision makers accountable, more people die. That's the work. That's the burden. Madison thought about that as she drove back to the safe house. thought about burden and responsibility and the price of doing the right thing. On her last night as a civilian, Madison sat alone in the safe house and wrote letters. One to Webb's sister in Chicago. One to General Navarro accepting the position officially. One to herself dated 6 years earlier, right after the helicopter crash in Syria. That last letter she burned. Watched the paper curl and blacken. Watched the smoke carry away the words she'd written to the frightened woman she'd been. You don't get to stay hidden. You don't get to be safe. But you get to choose what you fight for. Choose better this time. The next morning, Madison put on her uniform for the first time in 6 years. The fabric felt strange and familiar simultaneously. The weight of it, the way it changed how she carried herself. She looked in the mirror and saw someone she'd forgotten existed. Captain Madison Reese, combat trauma specialist. Soldier. A car arrived to take her to the military base where she'd begin her new assignment. Harmon came to see her off. You look different, he said. I feel different. Good different or bad different? Honest different. Harmon smiled. That's the best kind. He handed her a folder. Your first assignment. Navarro wanted you to have it before you reported. Madison opened the folder. Inside were files on 3 targets, all connected to the arms dealing network. All still active, all dangerous. She's not wasting time, Madison said. Neither should you. These people are still operating, still moving weapons, still killing people to protect their profits. Madison closed the folder. When do I start? Yesterday would be good. She laughed despite herself. Shook Harmon's hand, got in the car and watched the safe house disappear behind her. The drive to the base took an hour. Madison spent it looking at the files, memorizing faces, reading operational histories, planning approaches. Her mind shifted into the mode it had lived in for years before Syria. Tactical, focused, sharp. At the base, she was processed through security and escorted to a building that didn't appear on any maps. Inside, General Navarro waited with a team of analysts and operators. Captain Reese, welcome back. Navarro gestured to the room. This is your team. They've been briefed on your background and your role. You'll be leading the investigation into the remaining arms dealers. Full operational authority. Full support. No secrets. Madison looked at the faces around the table. Saw skepticism in some. Curiosity in others. None of them knew her. None of them had reason to trust her yet. I need to be clear about something, Madison said. I spent 6 years trying to disappear, trying to be invisible, trying to forget what I was and what I'd done. And it nearly got me killed. So I'm done hiding. I'm done with secrets. We're going to do this work, but we're going to do it right. Documented, accountable, legal. If anyone has a problem with that, speak now. Silence. Then one of the operators, a man in his 30s with sergeant stripes, spoke up. Ma'am, with respect, we've all read about what you did. How you stood up to corruption. How you testified. Most of us have been waiting for someone like you to take charge. So no problems here. Others nodded. The skepticism in the room shifted to something else. Respect. Maybe even hope. Good, Madison said. Then let's get to work. They spent the next 6 hours going through the targets, building profiles, planning operations. Madison fell into the rhythm of it easily. Command, strategy, the chess game of hunting people who didn't want to be found. When the briefing ended, she stood at the window of her new office and looked out at the base. Soldiers training, vehicles moving, the machinery of military life operating with precision. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then she saw the area code. Syria. She answered. Hello? Captain Reese? A man's voice, accented, older. My name is Dr. Hassan Khalil. I worked at the hospital in Damascus where you were treated 6 years ago, after the helicopter crash. Madison's chest tightened. How did you get this number? With difficulty. I have been trying to reach you for many years, to tell you something important. What? The men who rescued you, the ones who paid for your treatment, they were not Americans. They were contractors, working for someone who wanted you alive, who wanted you available. I did not understand then, but I read about the trial, about Arthur Brennan, and I understand now. Madison's hand gripped the phone. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know. And because there is one more thing. Before they left, one of the contractors said something to me. He said you were insurance, that someone important believed you would be useful someday, and that when the time came, they would activate you. Activate me? His words, not mine. I did not know what it meant then. But now, the call cut off. Madison tried to call back. The number didn't connect. She sat down slowly, mind racing. Brennan had orchestrated her rescue, had kept her alive, had tracked her for 6 years, had used her to draw out Webb and anyone else investigating the corruption. She'd thought she was fighting back, taking control. But maybe she'd been playing a role in someone else's plan the entire time. Madison looked at the folders on her desk, at the new mission, at the team waiting for her to lead them. She thought about Webb's words, about being a weapon, about never really stopping. Then she thought about something else, something more important. Every time Brennan and his network had tried to use her, she'd defied them. Every time they'd tried to predict her moves, she'd done something unexpected. They'd tried to make her disappear. She'd testified. They'd tried to silence her. She'd fought back. They'd tried to control her. She'd destroyed them instead. Maybe that was the point. Maybe being a weapon wasn't about who pointed you. Maybe it was about choosing your own target. Madison picked up the phone and called Navarro. I need to add someone to our target list. Who? The contractor who rescued me from Syria, the one who told the doctor I was insurance. If Brennan's network had international operators, we need to find them, all of them. That's going to expand the investigation significantly. I know. But we're not doing this halfway. We're going to burn the whole network down. Every operator, every financier, every person who helped kill those 12 operators. And we're going to do it legally, properly, with full accountability. Navarro was quiet for a moment. You really believe we can do this? Webb believed it. The 12 operators believed it. They died believing the system could be fixed. We owe them the effort. All right, Captain, let's make it happen. Madison hung up and looked at the files again. This time they didn't feel like burden. They felt like purpose. 3 months later, Madison stood in a military courtroom watching the final members of the arms-dealing network be sentenced. International warrants had been issued, contractors arrested across 4 continents. The network that had killed 12 operators and nearly destroyed everything Webb fought for was finally, completely dismantled. The judge read the sentences. The defendants showed no emotion, but in the gallery, families of the dead operators held each other and cried. Not from grief this time, from relief, from justice finally being served. After the hearing, Madison walked out into bright sunlight. Reporters shouted questions, but she ignored them. She'd done enough testifying, said enough words. Now she wanted to do the work quietly, the way it should be done. General Navarro found her in the parking lot. The Secretary of Defense wants to meet with you. Commendation ceremony. Medal for what you did. I don't need a medal. Maybe not. But the families of those operators need to see someone being recognized for doing the right thing, for not giving up, for fighting when everyone else said it was hopeless. Madison thought about that, about the woman who'd grabbed her hands and thanked her, about Sarah's kids asking if she would win, about Webb dying in surgery still believing the evidence mattered. All right, she said. When? Next week, Pentagon, full ceremony. Madison nodded. She drove back to base and went to her office. On her desk was a letter, hand-delivered. No return address. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single page, handwritten. Captain Reese. You don't know me, but I served with Marcus Webb in Somalia. I was supposed to be on the mission that killed him and the others. But I was injured 2 days before deployment. They left without me. I've spent 3 years wondering why I survived when they didn't. Then I watched you testify, watched you stand up to people who wanted you dead, watched you refuse to be silenced, and I understood. We survived so someone would tell their story, so someone would make it matter. Thank you for being that someone. Sergeant Daniel Torres, Madison read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her desk drawer where she kept the things that mattered. Webb's dog tags, photos of the 12 operators, letters from their families, reminders of why the work mattered, why standing up mattered, why refusing to be invisible mattered. That evening, Madison went for a run on the base, 5 miles, then 10, pushing herself until her legs burned and her lungs ached. When she finally stopped, she stood on a hill overlooking the training grounds and watched the sun set. She thought about the quiet nurse at St. Vincent's, about the invisible woman who'd spent 6 years trying to forget she'd ever been a soldier, about the person who'd believed safety meant hiding. That person was gone. And Madison didn't miss her, because hiding hadn't kept her safe. It had just made her an easier target. Being invisible hadn't protected her. It had nearly destroyed her. But fighting back, standing up, testifying, refusing to be silenced, that had changed everything. Not just for her, for the families of 12 dead operators, for Sarah and her kids, for every person who'd been hurt by corruption and thought nobody cared enough to stop it. Madison's phone buzzed. Text from Jessica at St. Vincent's. A photo. The nursing staff gathered around a plaque on the wall. She zoomed in to read it. In honor of Captain Madison Reese, who taught us that quiet strength is still strength and that standing up for what's right is always worth the cost. Madison smiled, saved the photo, sent back a simple reply, "Thank you." Okay. She walked back to her quarters as the base settled into evening quiet. Tomorrow, she'd brief her team on a new operation, track down more targets, continue the work Webb had started. But tonight, she let herself rest. Let herself remember the journey from that trauma bay to this moment. From invisibility to recognition. From running to fighting. From victim to victor. The work wasn't finished. Probably never would be. There would always be corrupt officials. Always be networks to dismantle. Always be people who thought power meant being above the law. But there would also always be people willing to stand up. To testify. To fight back even when the odds looked impossible. People like Marcus Webb. Like the 12 operators who'd died in Somalia. Like the quiet nurse who'd refused to step aside when armed men told her to. People who understood that strength wasn't about being loud or visible. It was about knowing when to strike, when to speak, when to refuse to be moved. Madison looked at her reflection in the window, saw the uniform, saw the scars, saw the person she'd fought to become. And for the first time in 6 years, she didn't see someone running from her past. She saw someone ready to face whatever came next. The night was quiet. The base peaceful. And Madison Reese, the woman everyone had underestimated, overlooked, and tried to silence, stood ready to prove them all wrong, again and again, for as long as it took, because some people were born to hide, some people were born to follow. But Madison had learned the hard way that she was born to fight. Not because she enjoyed it, not because it was easy, but because someone had to, and she'd spent too long watching from the sidelines. The world didn't need more invisible people. It needed people brave enough to be seen, strong enough to stand, stubborn enough to refuse to back down even when every rational instinct said to run. Madison had been invisible. She'd been quiet. She'd been careful. And it had nearly killed her. So she chose something different, something harder, something real. She chose to be visible, to be loud when it mattered, to be reckless in defense of what was right. And if that made her a target, so be it. Better to die fighting than to live hiding. The stars came out above the base. Madison watched them for a while, then turned and walked back inside. There was work to do. There was always work to do. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she was ready for it. All of it.